Shabbat Shalom. Like most people today, I have my share of fears. I have a fear of escalators, but don't worry, I'm taking steps to avoid them. I have a fear of speed bumps, but don't worry, I'm slowly getting over them. And when I was a baby, I used to have an irrational fear of hair. But after some time, it started to grow on me until it didn't anymore. Of course, we know that fear has taken over our politics, as Democrats and Republicans don't just disagree with each other. They don't just dislike each other, but genuinely fear the other's leadership. And now our fear is multiplying as the coronavirus, the COVID-19, spreads globally and leaves within its wake tremendous loss, sadness, and profound anxiety. I'm reminded of the books from Yuval Harari, a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, who writes that more than anything, war, famine, and plague have shaped the history of humanity. And today, that is exactly what we fear in their 21st century forms: war, famine, and now truly, plague. It is against this backdrop that we read this week in our Torah portion, Parashat Truma. Interestingly, in a great demonstration that Jews are not fundamentalists when it comes to reading sacred scripture. Our rabbis teach that the Torah is right now out of order, that this week's Torah portion is actually a response to the incident of the golden calf, about which we will read in a couple weeks later in the book of Exodus. As you may remember, Moses ascended Mount Sinai for 40 days to receive the Torah. After some time, our ancestors grew frightened that Moses would not return and that God had abandoned them. Stranded in the wilderness, feeling as if they were lacking a leader and the divine presence, our ancestors, in their fear, produced an idol, a golden calf, to which they began directing their prayers for protection. When Moses comes down the mountain, he observes their great sin, smashes the tablets of law, and pleads to God for forgiveness on behalf of our people. Eventually, God does forgive our ancestors and sends Moses back up the mountain to receive a second set of tablets. In addition, God realizes that perhaps more than any other instinct, fear drives the human condition. And so God commands the Israelites in this week's Torah portion, Parashat Truma, "Speak to the children of Israel and have them take for me an offering, a truma, from every person whose heart inspires him to generosity. You shall take my offering." God instructs Moses to build a portable sanctuary in the wilderness that would eventually come to rest in the holy temple of Yerushalayim, of Jerusalem. Asuli mikdash, God tells Moses in our Torah portion this week, "V'shachanti betocham, build for me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among you." Our rabbis teach that it was directly in response to the sin of the golden calf that God commanded the construction of a sacred space, not because God dwells in that space more than any other space, but because we need a place to go in order to feel God's transcendent presence. "Build for me a sanctuary," God says to Moses, not again because God dwells in that particular space, but that I may dwell among you, among the people Israel. Now, frankly, here is where I, as a student of Torah, start to get a little confused. Here's where things start to get a little murky for me. Many of you here are parents and grandparents. When your children or grandchildren, in their copious amount of free time, perhaps on a weekend or a school vacation, when your children conspire together to commit mischief against you, against the house, against someone else, or against each other, the last thing you did was punish them in the same place. No, you, like I might have done once or twice, or even yesterday evening, sent your kids each to their own rooms and told them to find something to do by themselves. Similarly, it would have made perfect sense in response to the golden calf for God to create a religion that celebrates the individual encounter with the divine. God could have, in response to us coming together to sin, God could have commanded us to go off on our own, to live as hermits, to find some remote, isolated location, to discover a burning bush of our own, and there to pray to God. But in our Torah portion this week, God does the exact opposite. God commands our ancestors to come back together. In their fears, our ancestors came together and did the worst possible thing they could do in creating an idol through the golden calf. Now, in response to their continued fears, God commands them to come together again in order to feel the divine presence and to overcome their fears. So what will allow the Mikdash, the portable sanctuary, to bring forth results different from the golden calf? What will allow one gathering of people fearing war, famine, and plague to be better, to be holier than the other gathering of people fearing war, famine, and plague? Part of the answer, I think, lies in strong moral, ethical leadership. When our ancestors proposed the golden calf, Aaron the high priest went along for the ride. He didn't necessarily participate fully in the sin, nor did he muster the strength to stop it. He said what people wanted to hear, rather than telling them what they needed to hear. In establishing the tabernacle and securing Moses' spot as a prophet and teacher, God set a precedent through Moses that a person of learning, humility, wisdom, courage, and faith should lead our people. A person of learning, humility, wisdom, courage, and faith should be our leader. Second, and most importantly, through the mitzvot of the Torah and our obligation to live those commandments amongst the community, the heavenly psychologist prescribed for us immersion therapy. When we most fear war, famine, and plague, we are not to hide in our homes. Rather, we're to gather together. We gather together to bring peace where there is strife, to feed the hungry, and to visit the sick. Later in Deuteronomy, Moses will command us to walk in God's ways. Our rabbis in the Talmud expound that we walk in God's ways by clothing the naked, visiting the sick, comforting the mourners, and by burying our dead with respect. More to the point, by commanding us to come together in the midst of our fears, God creates an opportunity for us to see those who are truly suffering. By commanding us to act with compassion, God then creates an opportunity for us to overcome our fears and to find joy in the midst of the chaos. That is, after all, what we are doing today with this bar mitzvah, and mindful of everything that's going on around us. We are experiencing joy in the midst of tremendous chaos. As our Torah reminds us, by commanding us to build a Mikdash, a sanctuary, God dwells among us because we feel God's presence most acutely when we help others. The research, by the way, is in, and it proves what the Torah commands here. Life is considered most meaningful when we care for others. We feel most spiritual when we reach out to those who are in need. When we build a sanctuary not just like this, but like this, then God truly dwells among us. In the 21st century, we are experiencing peace beyond what humanity has ever known, abundance of food beyond what humanity has ever known, and health care and longevity of life beyond what humanity has ever known. Yet we still fear. We fear war, famine, and we fear plague. Me? I fear plane travel too, though as I've learned, flying isn't dangerous. It's crashing that you need to be worried about. This day and every day, let us heed the advice of Parashat Truma. Let us look for courageous moral leaders, and either despite our fears or because of them, let us come together, figuratively and literally, to care for those in need around us. Additionally, let us be mindful that as fear from the coronavirus grows, those who will be most affected, not by the virus, but by our self-isolation, those who will be most affected are the poor, the oppressed, and those who are living alone, especially our older friends and family. If this virus situation worsens, we need to think more deeply and act more acutely to care for these individuals among our families and our community as well. My friends, on this Shabbat and in the coming days and weeks, may God bless us with peace, with abundance, and with health. But in the absence of peace, abundance, and health, may God bless us also with the strength and willingness to come together to act. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. May this be our will. And let us say together, Amen, and Shabbat Shalom.